know what it's like to fly like Superman, I got the ride for you, except it's not named Superman. Anyway, today I'll be reviewing Tatsu at Six Flags Magic Mountain. But first, welcome to 808 Coaster Life. It has been a while. If you're new to this channel and you love roller coasters and other theme park related stuff, please consider subscribing. So this ride ended up becoming my first ever flying coaster. You may be wondering, what is a flying coaster? Well, basically, these rides look similar to inverted coasters, but instead of being in a normal sitting position, you're in a prone position. So think something like Superman. Sometimes you're on your back, like in the case of the world's first flying coaster, Stealth at California's Great America, which was manufactured by Vekoma. The Flying Dutchman now resides at Carowinds as Nighthawk. Since the concept was too cool to pass up, B&M did their own spin on the flying coaster. Instead of starting facing up, you start facing down. B&M's first flying coaster was Air at Alton Towers, now known as Galactica. Magic Mountain, being the flagship Six Flags park, wanted to break some records with their version. So this ride opened on May 13th, 2006, and it opened as the tallest, fastest, and longest flying coaster in the world. And it managed to keep all these records until Flying Dinosaur took the length record and matched its top speed when it opened in 2016. And then later in 2020, Fly broke the length record again. One thing to note, this still remains to be Six Flags Magic Mountain's largest investment to date. This ride has a max height of 170 feet, it features a 111-foot drop and goes a maximum of 62 miles per hour. It traverses 4 inversions and 3,602 feet of track and costed a total of $21 million. Sheesh. Now, going up to this ride, you can't deny this ride has presence. It dominates most of the hill, and you're definitely gonna see it no matter where you are in the park, unless you're in like the parking lot. Even though the color scheme on this ride looks good, and I like how the supports almost blend with the surroundings, I think it would have also been cool if the ride stuck to its original color scheme, but just freshened it up a bit. Think something like what they did to Apollo's Chariot. Getting to the ride can be a little tricky, but a little searching around Samurai Summit from the entrance side should get you there. The line was about a 30 to 45 minute wait. It can get long, so I would recommend using the Six Flags app to find the best times to ride. Luckily, most of it was in shade, and you can even play Six Flags trivia while you're there. You enter into the station where you're greeted with immersive station ambiance and the ability to choose your own row. I found there wasn't much of a difference between the front and back rows, so if you want the better view, go for the front. If you want a slightly more intense ride, go for the back. The ride actually broke down while I was in the station for my first ride. The people on the train were just chilling in the prone position. Flying coasters aren't the most reliable coasters out there. The fact that it's made by B&M definitely helps, and I don't ever hear about extended down periods for these coasters. But most other B&M models are probably more reliable than this. At least this ended up being more reliable than a particular coaster next to it. The operations are about what you expect on a flying coaster. Not too long, but also not the quickest. Keep in mind, flying coasters are more complicated than your average coaster, so it's gonna take a longer time to get everyone seated and ready. Speaking of those trains, this ride features vest restraints with a pretty bulky lap bar and shin guards to hold your feet in. The restraints ended up being more comfortable than I expected. I never felt like they were too tight or it's hard to breathe, which is important because you're gonna be in this position for most of the ride. As an added bonus, for your loose articles, there are bins in the station, no cost. After you're pulled back into a Superman position, your ride experience begins by going up the lift hill. As you may notice, while the catwalk is of course still there, the floor is removed. This results in a really surreal experience and gives you a great view of the rapids ride below you. This is way cooler than an invert lift, and if you're wondering, there is a retractable platform in the case of an evac. You then experience your first drop, which didn't really provide airtime or weightlessness. If you're in the back, you do get a little whip, and it's pretty forceful at the bottom. You're also really going to feel that sensation of speed. Your first element is a corkscrew. While you go through it pretty fast, it wasn't too forceful, but you do get a little bit of weightlessness. Immediately following the corkscrew is a 0G roll, apparently the first on a flying coaster. It took this inversion slower, therefore giving you a true zero gravity experience, but it didn't feel too different from the first inversion. You then go into a horseshoe, which is really just an overbank turn. This was kind of forceful and has good pacing. As you will find, the ride keeps its pace very well. Overall, another really fun element. The next turn actually threw me off a little because it was actually pretty intense, but pales in comparison to the next element. You then go into what is called a pretzel loop. Think of it like a vertical loop, but inside out and inverted. This element is unique to flying coasters because it's not really possible in other coasters. The forces are on your back instead of your head, preventing something like a readout. It was very forceful for a long time. If you ever ridden those Gravitron or Roundup rides, this feels similar to those, except it doesn't last as long, so you won't get sick afterward. This element felt completely different from the rest of the ride, and I remember the first time I rode it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is happening. What is it gonna be like? Immediately following the pretzel loop is the ride's final inversion and inline twist. While being nothing special, this was still a fun element. To be fair, you're probably still recovering from the pretzel loop, at least I was. You then enter a 270-degree upward helix. This was decently forceful and gave you a great panoramic view of the park's entrance. You then jump into the brakes, which actually gave a little airtime, if you call it that. You traverse a little turn between brake runs, ending your ride on Tatsu. Now, one thing has to be said, this ride is butter smooth, which is important. You don't want to jostle around on your flying experience, that's not realistic. I also never found any discomfort with being in the prone position for the whole ride duration. That being said, I can imagine other people might find the position uncomfortable, and that's why the loading design on Fly at Phantasialand is better. On that ride, the trains rotate so you're facing sideways for boarding, and then a mechanism turns the train into the prone position before the ride actually starts. The duration felt right. It wasn't too short, but also didn't feel like it was going on too long. The ride is overall very well pace. It felt pretty graceful for most of the ride, so the pretzel loop might throw off inexperienced or unaware riders, but if the pretzel loop wasn't there, many would find the ride kind of boring. So if I were to make a minor nitpick, I would say make the rest of the ride a little more intense. But you can't deny this ride is very fun. It really feels like you're flying. And it helps that you're way above the ground for most of the ride. The only time you really get close to the ground is in the pretzel loop, and even that you don't really get to appreciate it. Overall, the pros are the fun factor, ride quality, pretzel loop, and pacing. The cons are seat orientation might not be for everyone. I'm gonna give Tatsu a final score of 4.6 out of 5 stars. You may be wondering why flying coasters aren't getting built frequently. Well, here's my guesses. For one, good flying coasters, one that isn't a Volair, are pretty expensive. This ride's cost was on par with hypercoasters. They're also not the most reliable, but they're not the worst either. Parks probably found that there are better value coaster types out there, like the trusty invert, wing coaster, or even a hyper, just to name a few. So parks may find those type of rides more essential to have than a flying coaster, and thus we'll add them first. Flying coasters are still innovating. Just look at Fly at Phantasialand. Vekoma's previous attempts at flying coasters were okay at best, but Fly looks to be one of the best flying coasters out there. Flying coasters are great if a park wants something different from an invert, but still looks like one. Their experiences are pretty different, so a park can add both if they have the money and land. Tatsu ended up being one of my favorite rides at Magic Mountain. I'm pretty sure that's the case for most people who go, and it's a must-do if you go to Magic Mountain. Another must-do attraction at Magic Mountain is Twisted Colossus. Here's my review of that coaster. Have you ridden a flying coaster? If so, let me know down in the comments which flying coaster you rode. And if you haven't, like I have for many years, let me know which one's your most anticipated. Here are some other videos you should watch. And if you like this one, consider leaving a like and maybe even subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.